BASF, the German chemical giant that survived 2 world wars. In 1865, as the American Civil War was ending and the Industrial Revolution was reshaping the world, a young dye salesman named Friedrich Engelhorn made a decision that would birth one of history's most enduring chemical empires. In the Rhine River town of Mannheim, Engelhorn founded Badische Anilin und Soda-Fabrik, later known simply as BASF. What started as a modest factory producing synthetic dyes from coal tar would grow into the world's largest chemical company, surviving 2 devastating world wars, forced breakups, and countless industrial revolutions. Engelhorn's timing was perfect. The textile industry was booming, and natural dyes were expensive and inconsistent. Synthetic dyes promised vibrant, consistent colors at a fraction of the cost. But Engelhorn's vision extended far beyond colorful fabrics. He saw chemistry as the key to transforming raw materials into valuable products, a philosophy that would drive BASF for the next century and a half. The company's first major breakthrough came just 3 years after its founding, when BASF chemists successfully synthesized alizarin, a red dye previously extracted from the madder plant. This achievement not only established BASF as a serious player in the chemical industry, but also demonstrated the company's commitment to research and development, a tradition that continues to this day with over 10,000 researchers worldwide. The early decades of BASF were marked by rapid expansion and groundbreaking discoveries that would reshape entire industries. By 1877, the company had developed synthetic indigo, breaking the monopoly of Indian indigo farmers and revolutionizing the textile industry. The process took 17 years to perfect and required an investment equivalent to hundreds of millions in today's currency, but it established BASF as the world's leading producer of synthetic dyes. The company's workforce grew from 200 employees in 1870 to over 8,000 by 1900, making it one of Germany's largest industrial employers. BASF's success wasn't just about chemistry. It was about creating an integrated business model that controlled every step of production, from raw materials to finished products. The company built its own power plants, railways, and even housing for workers, creating what was essentially a chemical city along the Rhine. This vertical integration allowed BASF to maintain quality control and reduce costs, giving them a significant advantage over competitors. By 1900, BASF controlled nearly half of the world's synthetic dye market, with sales offices spanning from New York to Shanghai. The company's research laboratories had become legendary, attracting the brightest chemists from across Europe and establishing the model for industrial research that other companies would follow for decades. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 transformed BASF from a dye manufacturer into a crucial component of Germany's war machine, setting the stage for both unprecedented growth and future catastrophe. The British naval blockade cut off Germany's access to Chilean saltpeter, the primary source of nitrogen for explosives, threatening the country's ability to continue the war. BASF's Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch had been developing a process to synthesize ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen, initially intended for fertilizer production. The Haber-Bosch process, as it became known, allowed Germany to produce synthetic nitrates for explosives, effectively extending the war by years. BASF's Oppau facility became the world's largest ammonia plant, producing hundreds of thousands of tons annually. The irony was stark. The same process that promised to feed the world by enabling cheap fertilizer production was being used to create the explosives that were destroying it. Karl Bosch would later win the Nobel Prize for his work on the process, but the wartime application cast a shadow over this revolutionary achievement. The war years saw BASF's workforce swell to over 50,000 employees, and the company's profits soared as demand for chemicals skyrocketed. However, this prosperity came at a terrible cost, as the company became increasingly dependent on government contracts and military production, a relationship that would have devastating consequences in the decades to come. The end of World War I brought catastrophe to BASF as the victorious Allies systematically dismantled Germany's chemical industry and seized the company's most valuable assets. Under the Treaty of Versailles, BASF was forced to surrender all its patents and trademarks, losing intellectual property worth billions in today's money. The company's foreign subsidiaries were confiscated, including major operations in the United States, Britain, and France. The Allies also demanded massive reparations payments, crippling Germany's economy and forcing BASF to find new ways to survive. The most devastating blow came in 1921 when an explosion at the Opal plant killed over 500 people and destroyed much of the facility. The blast was so powerful it was heard over 100 kilometers away and left a crater 30 meters deep. Carl Bosch, now leading the company, made the crucial decision to rebuild not just the plant, but the entire business model. Recognizing that BASF could no longer dominate through patents and proprietary processes, Bosch focused on operational excellence, cost reduction, and vertical integration. The company began producing not just chemicals, but also the equipment and machinery needed for chemical production. This diversification strategy would prove crucial in the turbulent decades ahead, as BASF learned to adapt quickly to changing market conditions and political upheavals. The rise of Nazi Germany in the 1930s forced BASF into a Faustian bargain that would define the darkest chapter in the company's history and teach hard lessons about corporate responsibility. In 1925, BASF had merged with 5 other German chemical companies to form IG Farben, creating the world's largest chemical conglomerate. Initially, this merger was a defensive move designed to compete with American and British chemical giants, but under Nazi rule, IG Farben became an integral part of Hitler's war machine. The conglomerate produced synthetic rubber, synthetic fuel, and poison gas for the military, while also using slave labor from concentration camps in its factories. BASF's constituent parts within IG Farben were responsible for producing materials essential to the war effort, including synthetic fuel that kept German tanks and aircraft operational when natural oil supplies dwindled. The company's scientists also developed synthetic rubber using a process that allowed Germany to continue producing tires and other rubber products despite the Allied blockade. Perhaps most controversially, IG Farben built a massive chemical complex at Auschwitz using concentration camp prisoners as workers, a facility that represented the complete moral bankruptcy of corporate collaboration with totalitarian regimes. Tens of thousands of prisoners died building and operating these facilities, a legacy that would haunt the German chemical industry for decades. The profits generated during this period came at an unconscionable human cost, demonstrating how easily corporate interests could become aligned with genocidal policies when proper ethical frameworks were abandoned. The end of World War II brought the complete destruction of IG Farben and forced BASF to rebuild from the ashes with a fundamentally new understanding of corporate responsibility and international cooperation. Allied bombing had destroyed 60% of BASF's production facilities, and the company's remaining assets were seized by occupying forces. The Allies were determined to prevent the reconcentration of German chemical production, viewing it as essential to preventing future aggression. IG Farben was formally dissolved in 1952, and BASF was reconstituted as an independent company, though it retained only a fraction of its former assets and capabilities. The company's new leadership, led by Karl Wurster, understood that rebuilding would require not just new factories, but a new corporate culture based on transparency, international cooperation, and ethical business practices. BASF began the painstaking process of rebuilding its research capabilities, recruiting scientists from around the world, and establishing partnerships with international universities and research institutions. The company also made the strategic decision to focus on civilian applications of chemistry, deliberately moving away from military contracts and dual-use technologies. This shift required developing entirely new product lines, from plastics and synthetic fibers to agricultural chemicals and pharmaceuticals. The Korean War boom in the early 1950s provided crucial demand for chemical products, allowing BASF to rebuild its financial foundation and begin expanding internationally once again. The post-war decades witnessed BASF's remarkable transformation from a war-torn German company into a global chemical powerhouse through innovation, strategic partnerships, and careful international expansion. The 1950s and 1960s marked the beginning of the petrochemical revolution, as companies learned to create an enormous variety of products from oil and natural gas rather than coal. BASF invested heavily in new technologies for producing plastics, synthetic fibers, and other petroleum-based chemicals, recognizing that this shift would reshape the entire industry. The The company's research spending increased dramatically, reaching over 4% of revenues by the 1960s, one of the highest rates in the industry. This investment paid off with breakthrough products like styropor expandable polystyrene, which revolutionized packaging and insulation, and ultramid polyamide, which became essential for automotive and electrical applications. BASF also pioneered new approaches to chemical plant design, creating highly integrated production complexes where waste products from one process became raw materials for another, minimizing environmental impact and maximizing efficiency. The company's Ludwigshafen site became the model for modern chemical complexes, with over 200 interconnected production plants operating as a single, highly efficient system. International expansion accelerated in the 1960s as BASF established major production facilities in the United States, Brazil, and Asia, moving beyond exports to become a truly multinational corporation. By 1970, BASF employed over 100,000 people worldwide and had annual revenues exceeding $10 billion, firmly establishing itself as one of the world's three largest chemical companies alongside DuPont and Dow Chemical. The oil crises of the 1970s and the growing environmental movement forced BASF to reinvent itself once again, this time focusing on sustainability, efficiency, and high-value specialty products rather than commodity chemicals. The dramatic increase in oil prices threatened the entire petrochemical industry as raw material costs soared and profit margins disappeared on many traditional products. BASF responded by investing heavily in energy efficiency and developing new catalytic processes that required less energy and produced fewer waste products. The company also began shifting its product mix towards specialty chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and advanced materials that commanded higher prices and were less sensitive to raw material costs. This strategic pivot required enormous investments in research and development as BASF worked to develop products for emerging markets like electronics, biotechnology, and advanced automotive applications. The company's pharmaceutical division made major breakthroughs in developing new drugs for cardiovascular disease and other conditions, while its materials science division created advanced polymers for aerospace and automotive applications. Environmental regulations also drove innovation as BASF developed new processes for reducing emissions and recycling waste products. The company became a pioneer in what would later be called the circular economy, designing production processes that minimized waste and maximized resource efficiency. By 1980, BASF had successfully navigated the transition from a commodity chemical producer to a diversified specialty chemical and pharmaceutical company, with operations spanning 6 continents and revenues exceeding $15 billion annually. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 opened new opportunities for BASF to expand into Eastern Europe and Asia, while the rise of biotechnology and nanotechnology created entirely new markets for the company's research capabilities. BASF moved quickly to establish operations in former communist countries, recognizing that these markets would experience rapid industrial growth as they transitioned to market economies. The company built major production facilities in China, India, and Eastern Europe, often in partnership with local companies that provided market knowledge and political connections. These investments proved prescient as these regions became major growth drivers for the global economy. Simultaneously, BASF invested heavily in biotechnology, developing genetically modified crops, new pharmaceutical compounds, and bio-based chemicals that could replace petroleum-derived products. The company's life sciences division became a major player in agricultural biotechnology, developing crops resistant to herbicides, pests, and environmental stresses. BASF also pioneered nanotechnology applications in chemistry, creating new materials with properties impossible to achieve through conventional processes. These advanced materials found applications in everything from automotive coatings to electronic devices, commanding premium prices and high profit margins. The 1990s also saw BASF make major acquisitions to strengthen its position in key markets, including the purchase of Imperial Chemical Industries' specialty chemicals business and Knoll Pharmaceuticals. By 2000, BASF had become the world's largest chemical company by revenue, with operations in over 80 countries and annual sales exceeding $30 billion. Today, BASF stands as the world's largest chemical company with annual revenues exceeding $70 billion, employing over 100,000 people across 6 continents, and serving customers in virtually every industry from agriculture to aerospace.
The company that began as a dye manufacturer in a small German town now produces over 60,000 different products, from basic chemicals and plastics to advanced materials and biotechnology products. BASF's research budget exceeds $2 billion annually, supporting innovation centers around the world and partnerships with leading universities and research institutions. The company has become a leader in sustainable chemistry, developing products that help customers reduce their environmental impact while improving performance. BASF's Verbund concept, where production plants are integrated to maximize efficiency and minimize waste, has become the industry standard and is now being applied to reduce carbon emissions and achieve climate neutrality by 2050. The company's journey from Friedrich Engelhorn's modest dye factory to a global chemical empire spanning nearly 2 centuries demonstrates the power of scientific innovation, strategic adaptation, and learning from past mistakes. Through 2 world wars, economic crises, technological revolutions, and dramatic political changes, BASF has survived and thrived by maintaining its commitment to research, embracing change, and recognizing that long-term success requires balancing profit with responsibility to society and the environment. Today's BASF bears little resemblance to the company that once produced poison gas and used slave labor, having transformed itself into an organization focused on creating chemistry for a sustainable future, while never forgetting the hard lessons of its past.